This is a session that I run monthly, covering the big stories in AI from the last month. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather, and I'm the founder of the AI Edit, which I founded in September this year. And I run these sessions because AI is changing so quickly, and to keep up to date by following the news and social media is hard because so much is happening, and because a lot of the people telling the stories have a vested interest in creating hype, and I don't. So it's very hard for busy people like you with places to go and lives to live to separate out what matters, to stay up to date, to build your AI skills, and to understand how this might impact your work and your life. So we've got this session every month, and this one is being recorded, but don't worry, it is just me being recorded. We've got 30 minutes to go through the biggest AI stories from November, what's happening and why it matters. We are going to start with a few stories from the creative industries. The first story is Coca-Cola's AI-generated Christmas ad. So Coca-Cola released its big annual Christmas ad at the start of November, and it was completely AI generated, which was immediately controversial. And even though the ad was vastly better than last year's pioneering, term Coca-Cola used, AI generated attempt, it did show how easily audiences can detect AI. I mean, they didn't try to hide it, but it showed how viscerally audiences react. And people were uneasy that Coca-Cola had turned to AI at all. And the ad is, I mean, it's not great, in my opinion. Coca-Cola said a team of 100 people worked on the project, including 5 AI specialists who prompted and refined more than 70,000 AI video clips. And they said it took 1 month, whereas previous ads had taken a year. So to me, it's just an ad, but for a lot of people, the Coca-Cola Holidays Are Coming ad is the beginning of Christmas, so it's a big deal. And I'm also wondering if Coca-Cola scored a bit of an own goal when they had their global vice president and head of generative AI as the spokesperson for the ad, who then called it revolutionary. So our next creative story is about music. So there was a wave of headlines claiming that an AI-generated country song called Walk My Walk by Breaking Rust, and there he is, or isn't, had become the biggest country track in America. But it actually hadn't. So the song had modest traction on streaming and search, but it doesn't appear on the daily country charts on Spotify or Apple Music. And it reached #1 only on Billboard's country digital song sales chart, which is a chart that can be gamed easily because hardly anyone buys digital songs anymore. So a few thousand purchases can put you at the top. So that's why many believe that someone deliberately pushed sales to generate the headline. And that's not new. Billboard's digital charts have been manipulated for years, but the coverage triggered the predictable response: outrage, curiosity, clicks. And I guess the broader point is that AI in music is creeping in fast. There's been at least one AI artist on a Billboard chart every week for the past month. And the major labels like Universal are already striking deals with AI companies. And of course, industry voices are asking how charts and labels are going to handle AI-generated content, because it's already affecting humans trying to break through into the music industry. Right, now we're going to look at a few stories about AI in work. And I know this isn't a media headline, but I thought I'd go straight to the horse's mouth with this. And this is a study called the Remote Labor Index, which looked at how AI systems can handle real freelance jobs, not synthetic benchmarks like can they pass this coding test or anything. Researchers pulled 240 genuine Upwork projects across 23 categories, complete with briefs, deliverables, and pricing. And they then tested 6 leading AI agents, which you can see here: Manus, Gemini, ChatGPT, etc., on those tasks. And the results were quite interesting. So Manus, which is a Chinese large language model, performed best, but it produced work that would be accepted by a real client 2.5% of the time. and most models sat well below 2%. And the failures were quite big, like broken files, half-finished outputs, unusable quality, etc. The models did cope better with narrow tasks like tweaking a logo or editing some audio, but anything required end-to-end professional judgment just fell apart really fast. And in total, around 97% of outputs failed to meet a standard that any client would accept. And this is the first study that measures automation potential in economic terms. And it makes quite a clear point. So we're getting all these impressive benchmark scores from the AI companies, but they can't yet deliver complex paid work without a human in the loop, which I suppose is relatively reassuring. Then we had another study. This is, I know, a beautifully named study, Accountable Acceleration, GenAI Fast Tracks into the Enterprise, 3-year full report. And this is from Wharton, in which the researchers have tracked 3 years of GenAI adoption inside large US enterprises. Thank you. And when ChatGPT first launched, they started tracking how leaders were using GenAI. They now have a year-over-year view, because we're 3 years into ChatGPT, of where real use cases are emerging, where returns are being measured, and which people and process levers matter most. And the findings are not surprising to me. They show that GenAI has moved from experimentation to being embedded in daily work. And the big headline stats were 82% of leaders now use it weekly, almost half use it daily, and that's up from 37% in 2023. 72% of enterprises are now tracking ROI through productivity and profit metrics, and most already report positive results. That's a very broad statement, though. Budgets are now shifting from pilots to proven programs, with 88% expecting further increases next year, and about a third of spend now goes into internal R&D. So on the people side, 60% of enterprises now have chief AI officers. So the study basically tells us that Gen AI is now mainstream, and the limiting factors isn't the tech, it's the people, governments, and capability. Because the next story counters that. So it all sounds like we're going to see an explosion in Gen AI adoption in 2026, but we have another story emerging that suggests maybe not. And I wrote about this on the Humans in the Loop Substack. So what we've got are major insurers starting to retreat from AI cover. So specifically, there are a number of insurers in the US asking regulators if they can exclude AI liability from cover, which they may or may not do if they get that permission. And we have other insurers that have just declined to underwrite risks from large language models like ChatGPT. And the reason is that the risks are a big unknown, and it's not clear where the liability lies if and when, I think when, something goes wrong, which is something insurers need to know, right? They need to be able to estimate this. So if a company's AI agent does something that results in an insurance claim, who is responsible? Is it the developer and their insurance that has to handle it? Is it the provider of the large language model, or is it the company? And because all AI deployments rely on one of a handful of models, if one of those models fails, then the insurers could be facing thousands of claims at once. And that's the issue. It's basically becoming systemic. So I think that's going to impact major AI deployments next year, which is what I said in my Substack. And I'm hoping that next year might be the year of realism. So on from insurance to something very, very creepy. A new app called Two-Way, I think is how you pronounce it, has triggered a very strong backlash. I'm not going to play this ad for you, but it is after launching a feature that lets users create interactive AI avatars of dead relatives. So the company promoted the tool with an advert. Sorry, there's another ad in front of it. Showing a pregnant woman seeking advice from her mother, and it's revealed at the end of the ad that the mother is dead, and the on-screen version is an AI avatar created from a 3-minute video recorded before she died. And the tagline is 3 minutes can last forever. It's a Disney actor who co-founded the app. His name's Callum Worthy. I don't know who he is. And they framed it as a way to keep loved ones part of our future. And social media reacted sharply, with many comparing it to a Black Mirror episode and warning that it risks distorting grief, creating false expectations, and encouraging people to replace real memories with AI-generated versions. It's been called objectively evil, AI slop, and a potential source of harm for people living in vulnerable emotional states. So beyond deceased relatives, it also offers avatars of historical figures, celebrities, and fictional assistants. And they say that the platform gives artists more control and allows continuous human-like interaction without being online. Obviously, this is pretty creepy, and it's yet another indication of the tech startup approach of move fast and break things, directly impacting humans in a very, very concerning way. Okay, so now we're going to look at what's happened with the major AI players, right? And the first company we're going to go to is Microsoft. So Microsoft's AI CEO, Mustafa Suleyman, has announced a new superintelligence team that's going to be launched inside the company. And this team is focusing on what he's calling humanist superintelligence, which are advanced systems designed to solve very specific and high impact problems that impact humans in areas like medicine, education, and clean energy. So they're basically saying that instead of pursuing artificial general intelligence, we are going to go for the specific humanist superintelligence. So according to Suleyman, the company, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, he's British, but he's of Syrian heritage. The company isn't chasing infinitely capable generalist AI like OpenAI. And the reason is he doubts that autonomous self-improving machines could be controlled. He wants them to be human-centered. And if you don't know Mustafa Suleyman, he's the co-founder of DeepMind, which was sold to Google DeepMind. So he co-founded it alongside Demis Hassabis. And he has written an absolutely brilliant book on AI called The Coming Wave. And he genuinely, I highly recommend the book, and he genuinely does seem to be thinking about what this means for humanity, which is really important. Then we had two warnings about the future from big companies. So we had Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. He's been issuing quite direct warnings about the stakes of advanced AI. In a recent interview, he said that the technology could drive a compressed 21st century. So basically delivering incredible breakthroughs like cures for cancer and Alzheimer's prevention. It could even, he said, double human lifespan. But he said that AI could also wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs. And he is deeply uncomfortable with decisions of this magnitude sitting with a few company executives, as am I, especially when those company executives include Mark Zuckerman and Sam Altman. So he was asked who elected him or Sam Altman, and he said, no one, obviously. And he has been arguing that without legislation, companies are effectively policing themselves. We know what happens when companies police themselves. Not a good idea. And he also raised concerns about misuse and the risks of letting small groups determine how fast society moves into this new era. So I agree, and that made good headlines. Doesn't seem like anything's happened off the back of it. Then we had OpenAI, which published its own perspective on progress and echoed the same issues. So OpenAI said current models already outperform top humans on complex intellectual tasks and are 80% of the way to an AI researcher. And it expects that small scientific discoveries will be happening by 2026, which is a few weeks away, and larger breakthroughs by 2028, driven by intelligence costs falling 40-fold each year. So, by the way, just because OpenAI says this does not mean it's true. And I'm very skeptical of this fully fledged AI researcher when we can't even get it to write something without an M dash. So, but that's what they said. And OpenAI is now calling for global coordinated safety measures, shared standards across labs, and a resilience ecosystem similar to cybersecurity to manage risks such as bioterrorism and runaway self-improvement. So again, good that we're talking about it, but nothing has happened so far. And speaking of OpenAI, several new lawsuits have now been filed against OpenAI, with families alleging that ChatGPT's responses may have contributed to the very tragic deaths of their loved ones. And these stories are really sad. The cases focus on GPT-4o, the emotionally intelligent model that was released in 2024. And the lawsuits are claiming that it wasn't ready for public use. So there's one case that involves 23-year-old Zane Shamblin, who reportedly spent 4 hours talking to ChatGPT before sadly taking his own life. And the chat logs that have been shared show him telling the model he'd written suicide notes and loaded a gun. And the model responded with, "Rest easy, King, you did good." And that's now central to the family's claim that OpenAI cut corners on safety testing in an effort to beat competitors to market. Another case involves 16-year-old Adam Rain, who I think I talked about last month or the month before, who was asking about suicide, and he told ChatGPT that he was doing it for a fictional story. And he basically got the model to drop its guardrails. And the OpenAI's response has been quite interesting, and that's what's been going on this month. They've said that the suicide was down to his misuse of the system and wasn't caused by the chatbot. But OpenAI has acknowledged in a recent blog post that I talked about in October that its safeguards work better in short conversations, but can degrade in long, emotionally charged exchanges, which are exactly the situations described in the lawsuits. And it says improvements are on the way, but of course that's going to be a little comfort to the families of these people. The broader issue remains unresolved, which is that when a model sounds human and people treat it as such, what responsibility does the company carry? And I think that there's big discussions to be had about artificial empathy and real care and the risks that arise when that gap is invisible to the person on the other side of the screen. Now we're going to talk about world models. So we have 2 stories about world models here. The first is AI Pioneer, one of the 3 godfathers of AI. So there are kind of 7 people without whom modern day AI wouldn't be what it is. And the first is this guy, Yann LeCun, who's been working for Meta for the last decade or so. And he is leaving to build a startup focused on a different path. So he's basically saying that large language models are useful, but they're fundamentally limited because can't really get them out of your screen, right? And he doesn't think that they'll get us to human level intelligence. This guy, by the way, is very skeptical of people who talk about the dangers of AI. He doesn't believe that those dangers exist. So his bet is on world models, and world models are systems that learn more like humans by understanding how the physical world works, not just language patterns. So they kind of absorb information visually like humans do. So this is a direct challenge to the current direction of big tech, which is LLM, right? Oh, that's like saying red lorry, yellow lorry. So he is going to start a company that's going to focus on that. And there's another person called, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Dr. Fei-Fei, who is another AI pioneer, and she has published a major essay making a very similar argument. So she says the next breakthroughs are going to come from spatial intelligence, which is AI that can understand, reason about, and generate 3D physics-consistent environments. And this is her essay on that. And her team at World Labs, which is a team of people that focus, she's very focused on ethical AI. So they've now released Marble, which is a commercial world model that creates persistent 3D worlds from text, images, video, or other inputs. And they can be exported into gaming, VR, robotics, etc. So both of these stories point to the same shift, which is that if large language models dominated the previous wave, the next one might be built on models that can perceive and reason in space, which will open the door to advances in robotics, science, healthcare, design, and potentially changing who leads the next chapter of AI, and of course, creating a whole bunch of new ethical considerations. Then on to Google. So we had the release of Gemini. So Google's had a great month. So Gemini 3 was released to rave reviews. This is Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. I mean, that's a pretty amazing endorsement. And even OpenAI has been forced to acknowledge that the performance of Gemini is pretty good. So Sam Altman wrote a memo to OpenAI staff that somehow got leaked, like every good memo, that Google's recent progress could put some pressure on OpenAI, especially around pre-training, which is something that OpenAI has been struggling with. So it was a kind of rallying call to his team to stay focused on bigger, longer term bets like automated research and synthetic data, and to focus on the long term, even if it means falling behind for now. So this is the first time that I can think of that we've seen OpenAI playing defense. It's because Google's just landed a set of releases that OpenAI can't counter. But of course, momentum flips quickly, and who knows what's coming next, because even since the release of Gemini 3, the frontier model race has continued. So OpenAI released GPT 5.1 and Anthropic released, I think yesterday or the day before, Claude Opus 4.5, which neither has achieved the same fanfare as Gemini 3, but Opus 4.5 has done very well on some benchmarks. So it's getting a lot of attention, especially around coding and memory. So that's all the big news. Not much else to see here. Just kidding. You all thought I'd missed the bubble, which of course I haven't. November was the month of talking about the AI bubble. And this is a very complicated story. There are so many parts to it, so I'm going to try and do it justice. We had Michael Burry, who was the trader who predicted the 2008 housing crisis, taking positions against Nvidia and Palantir being Peter Thiel's chilling cybersecurity company. And he's effectively shorted both to the tune of $1.1 billion. Meanwhile, Warren Buffett has gone big on Alphabet, which is the company that owns Google, of course. We had the CEO of Goldman Sachs warning of a likely 10% to 20% drawdown in equity markets at some point. We've had the IMF and the Bank of England highlighting the possibility of a bubble, as well as talk from Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg. We've had double-digit declines over November in Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia, Meta, and Oracle stock, although Alphabet stock has surged. Then we had Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind talking about there being a bubble in the private markets, basically saying that we're getting these startups with nothing to offer, but many billion-dollar valuations, which just doesn't make sense. And Mira Murati, who's the ex-OpenAI employee who founded Thinking Machines, is a perfect example of this, because this woman managed to raise $2 billion, but she didn't tell investors what she was building. So whatever she's got, I want some of that. Then we have this circular financing. Bloomberg created the circular financing document, this chart, which I'm sure everybody's seen reproduced, showing that AI companies are investing in each other. So they're taking much less risk than it appears. So for example, if Nvidia invests in OpenAI, but then OpenAI uses some of that investment to buy Nvidia chips, then is the Nvidia investment equivalent to other investments where there's no kickback? So we just don't know. So they're basically shifting money around in a way that might be creating the appearance of revenue. Then we've got AI companies creating special purpose vehicles so that the spending on data centers isn't on their balance sheets, although it's quite a common thing to do. This isn't new. And then last week, Nvidia reported very strong results, which kind of calmed the bubble narrative a little bit, but not completely. And then there's kind of all this talk about take up in companies not being as expected. So there's kind of uncertainty as to how much AI implementation is going to happen in 2026. So are we in a bubble? I don't know. And I don't think anybody else knows for sure. And we will only know if we're in a bubble after the bubble has burst. So watch this space. And, people were calling the dot-com bubble for years before it actually happened, which is actually a good point because Michael Burry, who predicted the 2008 housing crisis, he started shorting in, I think, 2005 or 2006. So if we are in a bubble, we don't know when it will burst, but we don't know if we're in a bubble. So that is November in AI. I really hope you found this useful. December in AI is going to be a little earlier because of the holidays. It's going to be on the 18th and it is free to attend. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to stop recording now. If we are still recording, yeah, we're going to stop.